Thank you so much for your time today. It's an honor to meet you and talk to you about Lifehouse, which I have right here, and it is a truly big and beautiful book. So thank you so much for sending it to me and for taking the time again. Yeah. First off,
Thank you too. Thank you too.
I had a question. I had a very specific question for you, sir. This is I want to point out a particular picture in this book for you, and the question I have is, do I have you to thank for the eyeball mouth gag? Because this is an image that still might give me nightmares.
I've had nothing to do with any of the images at all. The fantastic thing about this is that I went back to Jeff Krelitz, who's my partner on the project. From hard rock comics right through to what he's doing today, and just said, listen, I really want to get behind this because I think it's so fantastic and so beautiful and such a great project, and the writers have been great, the artists have been great. And a lot of the time when I've done interviews about the box set that was a part of it at its inception, a lot of the conversation has been about the failed project that the Who were involved in many, many years ago in 71, 72, and the story behind that. And I'm very, very happy to talk about that. But it was after doing a load of those interviews, I kind of sat down and I had a look at the comic again, and I thought, this is sort of getting ignored in the Who story, because in a sense this has come out of the Who story, but it stands alone. It has its own place, and it in a sense, very much because the Who dropped the Lifehouse story. Like, we couldn't handle it. I should say we couldn't get it to happen. We couldn't get it to completion. And what this comic has done is he's realized it.
Now, what I read was that you wrote the original screenplay for The Lifehouse in 1970, and I know it's gone through various editions and iterations over the years. So what I wanted to know, in what way do you feel like the original concept has evolved with this transition into a graphic novel?
Sorry, can you explain what you mean by that? I've got a bit lost there.
Just basically how you originally wrote it and conceived it back in the early 70s, and how that concept has evolved, taking it from, a musical rock opera idea to, this graphic novel.
Well, you know what? It was a film script before it was anything else. I'd been doing a series of, as a journalist, a sort of a music journalist, alongside my work with the Who, about the emerging festival scene. And this was, of course, post Monterey, post Woodstock, and about the energy that happened, the sort of under the surface cerebral energy, and sometimes, I might use the word spiritual energy, that I felt was happening at rock concerts, both that I was performing at, but also that I was attending. Something was happening which was due to the fact that the numbers had gone over that 1,000 threshold, 1,500 threshold that you got from working in Broadway type theatre venues, which were for plays and for ballets and for music events with celebrity singers like Sarah Vaughan and so on. These were big places, between 5,000 and 20,000 people, sometimes many more. And something extraordinary was happening. And I was writing these articles, and I decided that what I really needed to do was to try and wrap it up in a movie script. And I actually wrote it a couple of days after we performed at the Isle of Wight Festival, which was the first big British festival where Bob Dylan headlined. A band called Moody Blues were on, we were on, and a couple of other really great bands were on the set. And there's no question that, I came away from that thinking, I'm right. This This was like going to, you know, a really great epic version of the Olympics, or to a meeting with the Pope, or going to Mecca or something. This was an extraordinary moment, and wrote this film script. And a friend of our managers took it to Ned Tennant, who was then the head of the film division at Universal, and he really liked it and agreed to fund it. And so I just immediately threw myself in behind this. And I had no experience in the movie industry, no experience in writing scripts. And really, it should have moved forward fairly gracefully, except that the Who's management organization, Chris Stamp and Kit Lambert, were starting to fall apart at that time. It just so happened that it fell apart. So it stumbled. We went into workshop. It didn't happen. So when you say that there are a number of iterations of this, there's always been me revisiting it to try to, in a sense, find some way to make it feel as exciting as it once was. And what I really like about the graphic novel is they haven't with the original film script. Well, they have, but in a good way, you know, mischievously, in a colorful way. They've taken a few liberties here and there, but they've all been really delightful. When I've worked with creative people in the years since the Who album came out, Who's Next, they've all looked at it as a problem project, and in most cases said, I'm unable to fix this. The film director, Alan Parker, who directed The Wall for Roger Waters, said to me that it was completely unworkable. It would never happen. Nick Rogue, the film director, his company looked at it. He looked at it. It came very, very close, and then at the last minute, he felt it was unworkable. The characters weren't properly developed, and there was too much work to do. And then a couple of other people, writers, journalists, sometimes creative directors who were, you know, in a sense trying to ride on the back of it, came at me with script versions, new movie script versions, which were so far removed from what I originally wrote that I said, well, listen, good luck with that, but that's not the original project. The comic is a really close representation of my original script.
Now, do you see the comic as the final realization of the Lifehouse project, or are you still hopeful to bring it to the big screen one day and make a film out of it?
You know, that would be great, but that's not really for me now. I think, you know, this for me feels like a real landing place for me. It's a happy place. And I know that's become a cliche, and I don't mean it's you know, I'm going to sit surrounded with piles of books. But it's a happy place for me. I feel really that this journey has been a really fun journey. It's been 2.5 years in the making, and we've one of the artists, James Harvey, got whacked by it. You know, he spent a long time, and eventually, and he was responsible for a lot of the images and the new people that have come in since have been terrific. So it feels to me like this. You know, and it's not a movie, it's not a TV series, and that might grow out of this. But I do feel that if that happens, there was one director, one producer, a guy called Herb Solow, Solow, and he was famous for being the chief producer. I think for Warner Brothers, possibly, I don't know, but of Star Trek, the TV series. And he read this script about 6 months after the Who album came out, and he went nuts for it. He really, really loved it. But as usual, felt that it needed a lot of work in order to get to the place where it could be turned into a series or a movie. He didn't like the title, for example. He wanted it to be called Guitar Farm. I don't quite know where that came from, but
No, I think Lifehouse is better personally. I don't know.
But anyway, well, I shouldn't discredit him because he was a fantastic enthusiast of the project, and it only that incarnation only failed because I was distracted by being on the road with the Who. and and also worn out by the project as well. So if something happens to it now, that will be great. But I
Now,
don't,
when you originally conceived of it as a film, and then later on you're sort of adapting the music into this rock opera, where music is essential, obviously. Same for film. When you turn it into a graphic novel, were there any concerns with that being a primarily visual medium?
no, because I felt that in a way, what the graphic novel does is it has a pitch, doesn't it, at trying to paint, describe visually musical experiment and spiritual, evolving spiritual uh, emotion as a result of being exposed to music and also to extreme media through the medium of experience suits, of virtual reality. And so that's worked out very, very well. A lot of the early feeling that I had about Lifehouse would it would make a terrific electronic music experiment, and that was a big part of my original vision. But that was just me, as um, Big Joe, of the Who. I'd had a big success with Tommy, and um, that was one of the reasons, why the band, who didn't really understand Lifehouse, the script, supported me anyway because I'd had such success with Tommy. So, so there was a big electronic music, the idea that music could be produced, that what's the word, that um, uh, it reflected, that it embodied, that it yeah, it embodied an individual, that music could be created that would deeply, deeply reflect and contain the essence of and the emotional and spiritual essence of a human being. And I actually set out on trying to do that without the help of computers. And in the end, I remember announcing, well, I haven't got the computer to do this job, but I'm going to be the computer.
You got all the help these days now that you want. But one thing I want to go back and read it. Like I said, it's been kind of a whirlwind for me the last couple of weeks because I got married and it's been insane. So I want to reread it, and I actually would. I know you've got intended track listings for Lifehouse, and you started with like Teenage Wasteland on the Lifehouse Chronicles, and I would almost like to listen to that album and sort of as ambient music in the background while I read this. And so I was curious if people did that, would you suggest people listen to those songs in that order while reading the graphic novel and maybe create like a full experience?
It wouldn't hurt to listen to Barbara O'Reilly as an opening song. That was the only electronic music experiment that I think was satisfactory. And funnily enough, it wasn't electronic synthesizer at all. I had synthesizers. It was done on an old, very old Lowry organ, which had a arpeggiation machine built into it, and made this crazy sound. And I cut it up in the old electronic music method, lots and lots of cut ups and to make this syncopated rhythm. I think it had 86 edits, and the
Wow.
studio was full of tape. It was 1 inch 8 track tape. Anyway, uh, uh, the songs were in two layers. There were a few that I wrote as the story was unfolding. There was one called Pure and Easy, which I would say was the most pivotal song. It was about the idea that we are all particles. We're made of particles. We're in a universe that is made of particles. Now, a lot of that is now something that is sort of common knowledge, in terms of the way that quantum physics has been popularized and made accessible to us. So we talk about the fact that we're all particles, and as I just said, that's a popular notion now. It's understood by many more people. I was just referring to it in a kind of a cod, a pseudo spiritual way.
Hmm.
I'd been reading a lot of writing by Meher Baba, who was in '67 he'd emerged as a very popular Indian teacher around the time of the Maharishi. And particularly in San Francisco, he was a big name there. And I've been following him. And also the Indian musician Hazrat Inayat Khan, who wrote a book called The Mysticism of Sound. And those two teachers influenced very much the idea that I had that human beings were, particularly those who lived in a world of music, particularly those that attended the concerts that I was attending and being a part of, who were, in a sense, transcending their individuality, their sense of uniqueness, and becoming a part of something bigger. Those people, especially those people, were going to be open to the idea that there was a note. It's since actually been discovered that the universe does have a note. I think it's E flat, dozen octaves down. There's just some kind of note that the universe actually has, but that there's a note that we all share. And that was kind of the pitch, really, that was the pitch. And so there was that. And then there were the songs. So Pure and Easy is a song about there once was a note, pure and easy, flying so free like a breath rippling by. And then the idea that we would all become that note. There was another song called Song Is Over, which related directly to the script, which would fit very well if you were sitting reading the novel. Barbara O'Reilly, as I said, would open the credits. But a song like Behind Blue Eyes, for example, was written about a guy called Jumbo, who is the villain of the story. And it's about the fact that he, at the end, and in the comic, if you read the comic, you see that at the end, he gets left behind. The whole audience at the Lifehouse event transcend and disappear. We don't know where, they go somewhere. And but he's left behind. And that's his song. Nobody knows what it's like to be the bad man, the sad man behind blue eyes. He's left behind. And it's been interpreted in all kinds of ways, but that's where the song came from. And then there are a few other songs which are what I would call tangential. They were written around the time that I was writing the book, the script. But I didn't really get far enough to develop the kind of songs that I was hoping to write, which were songs for individual participants in the workshop, the physical workshop.
Yeah. I love the idea that you're talking about, and I didn't know that about the universe having a note and that it's this very deep E flat. I didn't know that, but I love that idea of that we're all connected and that we have this ability to transcend beyond our own selves, and I think that's wonderful. One thing I did want to bring up in this book, the Who actually make a cameo in this. So I was curious if you were happy with how James and Max made you look.
Yeah, I think so. Why wouldn't I be?
No, I thought they did a great job. But in this version, when you guys appear, you've been cryogenically frozen. You've got some new nimble robot fingers, and there's a new pair of eardrums that you've got. And so speaking to the Who in the future, it got me thinking about bands like Kiss and ABBA who are putting on these AI powered concerts with holograms. And would you ever allow, the Who to put on a similar show like that? Just thinking about you guys in the future.
I think allowing Roger Daltrey to cast me as myself in his movie about Keith Moon is about the biggest stretch that I've got lately. Roger's working on producing a film about Keith Moon. Mm-hmm. And in order to do this movie, he has to get me to accept that his script, with me cast in the way that he sees me, is okay with me. Well, it isn't, but I've given him permission. Whether or not I would give somebody permission to turn me into an avatar is another story, because I think one of the things that I've had difficulty with all my life in The Who is the fact that I've been turned into a kind of a cliche. And I know that I've played a big part in that, with swinging my arms, smashing guitars, jumping about. But it does feel very strange, the idea that that would be the part of me that would be turned into an avatar, and not the very, very sensible, serious thinking, semi-intellectual Pete Townshend that lives at home and loves his dogs. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of I know a couple of the guys in ABBA, and what's so extraordinary, particularly Benny, who is the guy that wrote most of the really great music. One of my favorite songs is SOS, and it's almost like Bach. It's beautifully constructed. His work, his most moving work is Swedish folk music. He's in a Swedish folk band and he plays an accordion. That's what he does all the time. Nobody knows this. They just know him as and there he is up on stage in silly sort of flared glitzy pants, and that's him for the rest of time. But people won't know who he really was or really is. So I think, and Kiss, wow. Now for them, it just could work, couldn't it? Because they are not so much a cliche, but they're what's the word? They're a construction.
Yeah.
Uh, and I suppose to some extent ABBA are too, but I feel uneasy about the ABBA thing. I haven't seen it, but people that I know have seen it says it's breathtakingly good. So, who knows? There'll
Yeah.
be a line of people that really think that they're worthy of being immortalized with avatars, I'm sure.
I'm sure there's people that think that about yourself as well, but I do want to circle back to you talking about the Keith Moon biopic and you playing yourself. No, but is there an actor working today that you ideally would think, oh, he might do a good job playing me?
Oh dear. There's probably been a few in the past. Nick Cage once, I think sort of slight lookalike at one point. No, I don't. I remember that this is going to be an actor that's going to need to be below, Keith Moon died before he was 30, I think. So, this is the Who when we were very young. So this is
Mhm.
going to be kids, that play the parts, I think. So it will be somebody new. And also I don't think, I think the way Roger has constructed the story is that it's about Keith's life, Keith the man, as well as Keith the singer and the drummer of the Who.
Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait for that to come out. Now, I was just circling back to the graphic novel to stay on topic a little bit. I want to know how involved were you in the artwork and the visual representation of the Lifehouse world?
I wish I could say that I had a lot to do with it. I just was there to approve the initial images. The first batch of images rolled out, and I just loved all of them, and got more and more and more excited. And then in the end, I said to the producer of the project, to Jeff, I just said, listen, I feel completely comfortable with the way this is going. Let's just let it take its path now and see how it lands. And about halfway through, James Harvey did have to quit. I think it became too much work for him. So a new artist came in, and he's fantastic. I can't remember his name, Mick Gray, I think that's right, Mick Gray. And
Um,
and
sorry.
but the look of the piece didn't change. So no, I haven't had a lot. I've just done rubber stamping, really.
Yeah. Were there any new characters or plot lines that were introduced in the graphic novel that weren't part of the original script?
There was one, the leader of the political subjugation, the the bolting down of the masses, Veletania, was sort of a sexless, genderless creature in the second version of the script that I did. And in the comic, she's definitely a she.
Hmm.
And there was an opportunity there to have a genderless male-female character, but that wasn't picked up. But that was one character that was made much more glamorous than I imagined her to be. Um, anyway, yeah, no, the characters. There's a a limited number of characters. The Zeke and the Mary and the gang who are they're not part of the slip kids are the kids who go to run away from the subjugation, the government organized grid. I called it grid life.
Hmm.
And where they were told that pollution was so bad. Well, it was bad. Pollution was so bad that until it could be dealt with, they would have to go and be put into these experience suits and be safe and be entertained and be looked after and fed. And but there are a bunch of rebellious individuals called slip kids. They're very much in the story. And funny enough, in the story, in the books or in the comic, they are realized in a way it's really interesting. It's probably not how I would have seen them. I would have seen them in a much more kind of hippie, soft kind of 60s hippie way. The writer has made them much more subversive, much more like some of the radical hippies of the 60s, much more like the Chicago Six or the Chicago Seven or the Black Panthers. They're much more radical, much more active, and much more, in a sense, ready to die for their cause.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a change that I really love in the comic. It makes it feel like the kind of thing that would happen if suddenly, a government decided that conditions in on the planet were so bad that we all had to be packed off and put into sardine cans. There would be people that wouldn't do it. Survivalists, and these people, like for example, survivalists in the USA now are really serious about their freedom and their rights. And so, in a way, what's happening in the new Lifehouse story is that those people have an authenticity that I don't think they had in my original script. It's developed in a good way, I think. I'm very, very happy with it.
Yeah, but now that's something I want to ask about a little bit is that, based on your initial concept in the early 70s and where you've seen us go, in society and culture, do you feel like this story is even more relevant today than it maybe was, 30, 40 years ago?
It might be, it might not be. I mean, there were, when I wrote the book, I'd been a big fan of fantasy fiction and science fiction, and read a lot of it on the road, and in fact in the 40s, uh, science fiction writers, quite a few of the big ones, came up with ideas that were not dissimilar to this. So I can't entirely take credit. I wasn't copying them. I actually just discovered this after I'd written Lifehouse. I found examples by Ray Bradbury and who's the guy that I can remember his name. Yes, I am. Oh God, the most famous science fiction writer of all, who
Philip K.
did.
Dick, maybe? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
okay?
yeah, and that they had come up with ideas that were not dissimilar from this. But what's happened is that some of the strands have become developed, and I need to give you a bit of a picture of how this happened. When I was 16, I was already in a band, but my main aim was to become a kinetic sculptor. I was interested in technological sculpture. And at that time, this was in the late 50s, early 60s, there were very, very few examples of this. There were people playing around with early black and white television sets. This is pre-color television. And, people like Man Ray and so on making things, and the guy that made the urinal, I can't remember his name. There were people making things as installations. That was my interest. And the course that I picked up, the ground course that I did, the basic course before you moved into sculpture, you did 2 years of learning about what being an artist was run by a guy called Ray Ascott, who was a real visionary about the hope for how telecoms, computer technology, data transfer, data sharing, when it arrived, it's almost like the predictors now of the singularity is near. He was talking about, data transfer is near, communication is near, communication raised up, jacked up a level is near. I was deeply influenced by it. And I felt that he was a visionary man, and I think a lot of his ideas, and another one of the lecturers, two or three of the other lecturers were in the same ballpark, really fast-seeing, brilliant minds. And they predicted all this stuff. I remember Ray Ascot talking about the fact, and a guy called Harold Cohen talking about the fact that this is in 1961, that we would, all artists would in the end all be working on laptop computers. This is before the concept of having a home computer was even around. They were talking about this stuff. So I knew it was coming. In 1970, when I started work on Lifehouse, the synthesizer was new. It was new. Yes, of course, if you go into the synthesizer history books, you can find that the Russians had synthesizers in 1920 and 1930 before Stalin murdered all the musicians. That's what he did. He was scared of synthesizers, apparently. Anyway, and there were many others. There were like Lawrence Hammond that invented the Hammond organ. You could regard him as a synthesizer genius. There were certainly synthesizer things, but I'm talking about analog synthesizers, that you with the cables and you would plug stuff up and make funny noises. They just arrived, but there were no computers attached to them. There was no way. So in a sense, I jumped on this as a possible way of emulating what a computer might do. In so doing, what happened is I came into contact with some very, very interesting thinkers. One of them was Roger Powell, who was working for ARP. Roger Powell was a producer and composer, a musician, who went on to work for and with Todd Rundgren and Todd Rundgren's band Utopia.
Mm-hmm.
Todd came over and we spent a week together talking about the Lifehouse project and came up with a load of ideas. Another guy called Tim Suster, who was the composer in residence at Cambridge, introduced me to Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, the famous electronic music musician. I attended two or three concerts of his and spoke to him many times. I was introduced by Tim Suster to the principles of the radiophonic workshop, particularly Brian Hodgson. And they were based in Maida Vale, the BBC studios there. So I got really involved and imbibed in this incredible world of electronic music and its potential, but it was not going to do what I wanted it to do. So I loved it and I loved playing around with it. But I remember right the way through this period, The Who was incredibly active. We were on the road, we were doing 200 shows a year. So I was trying to use whatever time I had to spend time with my family, help bring up my kids, write songs, demo those songs in my home studio. I was really, really busy. But that period of working on the Lifehouse, what was so fascinating about it is that I was surrounded by really, really smart people who got the idea. They got it,
Yeah.
They were encouraging, Pete, do this. This would be great. If you could make this work, it would be fabulous. So I was very much encouraged by that. So then what I realized is that looking back, a lot of for example, Tim Suster once said to me, in the story, Pete, you've got all these people in their experience suits connected up by wires.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, that's how they get the programs, Tim. That's how they get the programs down the cables. And he said, but don't you realize that pretty soon there won't be any cables?
Yeah.
And I said, off. And he said, no, really. You and I'll have a little tab behind my ear. You'll have a little tab behind your ear. This is in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll send you a melody and you can send me a melody back and, we can share music through the air. And I remember thinking, he's nuts. And then I said to him, yeah, but anyway, we need pipes going through each experience suit to deal with the waste matter. This is a sewage system. Anyway, so I was surrounded by these people that were very, very fast seeing. So a lot of, if there's credit due or if there's credit necessary, a lot of it is due to other people. who came up with some of these ideas.
Yeah.
And so the sense that what we have today is we have a grid, we have a telecommunication system. We know that it's changing language. We know that it's changing personal communications. We know that it's changing the way we fall in love. We know that it's changing everything and continually changes and continually evolves. And our need to both live with it and respond to it is an immense challenge. On the other hand, we know, and particularly on this wave of AI, where we're afraid that AI might reflect the way that human beings think and behave.
Mhm.
And what we have to trust is that it won't. But the most important thing is, of course, is it could improve communication between nations, between peoples, between different cultures, because communication at the moment is so restricted by our inability to speak the many, 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 many different languages and accents and dialects that are required for us to have a conversation with everybody else in the whole world. Language is really f***ed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why don't we have one language? And when you look at what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, Putin is claiming that parts of Ukraine are Russian simply because people speak Russian. It's a mess. And so in a way, and he might be right, in a sense, he might be right because we know that, languages, particularly in the UK, for example, where people are trying to bring back, the Welsh language in Wales. This is one of our territories, one of our nations, devolved nations in the UK. They're trying to bring back the Welsh nation, the Welsh language, because they feel that the Welsh personality is it's inscribed and described by the language, and it's a beautiful language. It's worth saving. But if you could only speak Welsh, luckily most Welsh speakers can speak English, but most English people can't speak Welsh.
Hmm.
So the idea that I could have an AI button and I could speak Welsh, wow, I would do that.
Yeah. No, I
First
mean,
thing I would do, and I would start off with Shanghai, I have to say. Find
um,
out whether they really do eat dogs, which is what
I
my wife wants.
I want to go back a little bit and talking about you sort of being ahead of the times with technology and some of these big sci-fi concepts that you had, but also, your initial inspiration, right? With the concerts and how you noticed that people were coming together and this spiritual thing that you were sort of feeling in your concerts and in other people's concerts. And I'm curious about how you feel about the technology in concerts and how that's evolved and how light shows have become so much more, incredible, and the music's gotten louder and everything's gotten a little bit cleaner. And do you feel like that has heightened that spiritual experience in some ways, or do you think that it's detracted from it?
Well, that's a tricky question because I think, I'm in with you two at the Sphere now. Um, Everybody that I know that has been, I miss going, but everybody that I know that has been is completely blown away. But then, we've had these fantastic art installations, with video and all kinds of stuff. If you're in the mood to go and see that stuff, which many people are, the most extraordinary work is being done. But I think, on what's happening with the the Taylor Swift events, for example, where she's created a place where people feel really, really, really safe. And what I think was happening in the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, was a discovery that it was safe to blend at a music event, to allow yourself to unfold, to relax into the mood of the event, it could be that it was heavy music like Led Zeppelin or parts of what the Who were doing, but it could also be the gentleness of, or great R&B like Sly and the Family Stone, but also more gentle music like Joni Mitchell, like Crosby, Stills and Nash, that there was a cross section of music which brought together in festival events, um, had the effect of making people feel together. And that, like congregation. And remember that we grew up in a world, a post-war world, where, we're not responsible for it. I'm not going to have the boomers blamed for the decline in religious ceremony, but it's because of the war. I think people felt that religion had a lot to answer for and still does. We see so in a sense, a lot of us as young people, between the ages of 20 and 30, we were looking for a spiritual thing. And we got it from music and from concerts and from listening to music at home. There was the drug related side of that too, which is, that marijuana, which really took off in the 60s, really enhances music.
Mhm.
No question about it. I can remember I've stopped taking it in 1967, but I used to have that thing where I would listen to an album and I would hear it in a different
Yeah.
way. It would be enhanced. Then there was LSD that came along and enhanced vision and hearing and sight and feelings. And so all of those things had a spiritual function or a spiritual longing built into them. Is that happening now? It's a question. Don't know that I can come up with an answer for it. I think there's a lot of good stuff that's happening, and I think technological being blown away by technological miracles is something that we expect. I think when I first went to see the movie 2001, and at the end of it, the images really start to speed up like you're racing through the universe. I remember one event up in London, some guy who was stoned on acid got up onto the stage and walked through the screen. This is kind of what we want. What we wanted was an indication of the fact that what was in our heads, what was in our dreams, was a potential reality. Is what's going on at the moment demanding that degree of authenticity, of potential? Because entertainment has always been primarily, it begins as entertainment, a way to get us through a love affair or a bad emotional crash or overwork or illness or grieving the loss of someone we love. Those things are all part of what entertainment does. Serious plays help us to understand racism, political discordance, the loss of independence, the 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 effect of disenfranchisement when you're young, and also the loss of power when you get old. Plays, movies, all of this stuff, of which we now have this torrent of stuff, all comes from the desire for us to be able to spend the time that we would normally be watching Mickey Mouse, maybe making more use of the time. So I think the question is not one that can be answered, because I think, who knows, somebody might come out of the woodwork tomorrow and do something with technology and entertainment, which is really mindful. At the moment, what we have people trying to do that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the stage designer as Devlin, who was involved in the Sphere design for U2, is already well known as doing some of the most fantastic art and theatre installations in the world. I heard somebody say that she won't get out of bed for less than $1 million. She's really, really brilliant.
Yeah.
And does Broadway shows as well. And we expect our Broadway shows to be pretty mind as well. And if they're not mind, we expect them to be very dark and severe and stripped down. We expect something special. And so technology will always attempt to deliver something a little bit more. For The Who, without question, the breakthrough was laser beams. You know, we developed after the Tommy movie, we got a load of money. Rather than pay it away in tax, we started to develop a road crew company. And one of the things we developed were these very, very high power theatrical lasers.
Mhm.
And for a long time, for about 2 years, we were the only artists in the world that had them. And we could create a roof over a proscenium and slowly bring the roof down over the audience so that they felt that they were levitating. And so there were tricks like that. You know, there's always, you know, just even smoke is pretty cool.
No, I definitely think I agree with you, and think that maybe it comes down to just, you know, it's a personal experience, right? So I guess it's hard to, you know, some people might go and feel nothing, and while somebody else, their life has changed. I mean, you know, it just really probably depends on the individual at the end of the day. But anyway, I think we've hit our time, and I don't want to take up any more of yours. And this has been just truly an honor to get to talk to you, and what amazing answers. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you feel better very soon as well.
Yeah, I do feel, and I hope you recover, and congratulations. And I hope you have
we're leaving on our honeymoon tomorrow, so I
are you
probably
going to
won't
go?
recover for weeks. I don't know. We'll see.